give me a second, let me check. Okay, awesome. I think we're live on AirMeet, but in a second on YouTube because there's like a little bit lag. Um, okay, we are live now and we can get started. It's 7 p.m. Hello everyone, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us today for this much needed discussion for science communicators in the Indian ecosystem and for anyone looking at this career as a future prospect. Right? So I am Suchita Champa, the founder of SciRio, and I will be your host and moderator today. To briefly introduce SciRio to you all, it is an independent enterprise that enables science communicators by supporting them with capacity building and exploring unique opportunities for themselves. This panel discussion today is a part of one such effort, which we call SciComm Lite. SciComm Lite is our flagship biannual intensive workshop series where we introduce beginners in SciComm to the landscape of this career in a series of interactive sessions, specifically with the current panel members. So before I introduce the panel and start the discussion, I would like to let you all in on the discussion format for today. It will approximately last for about 60 to 70 minutes. The panel discussion and the panelists are going to discuss how they are creating opportunities for themselves and how you can make a difference for yourself and the community as an individual. Followed by that, we can have a small Q&A session where we can address questions from you all. So please feel free to drop any comments or questions that you might have in the chat box. And if you have a question directed to a particular person, please let us know who the panelist that you would like to ask the question for. Also, there's a big announcement from SciRio awaiting you all at the end, so don't go anywhere, and we're really excited for that. Okay, so now let me formally introduce you all to the panel members, although I'm sure you all know them all. We have Shreya Ghosh, a freelance science writer and editor with extensive experience in the field through her 3 year stint at India Biosciences and more. While at India Biosciences, she was the chief editor for many in-house publications and has had commissioned, edited, and published more than 200 pieces. Next up is Spoorthy Raman, yet another excellent freelance science journalist, writer, and editor. Most of you know her from her previous position as the founding managing editor at Research Matters. She also writes for major media outlets like the Deccan Herald. We have Aashima Dogra, a freelance science journalist and the co-founder of the Life of Science. Here, in this on this feminist science media, a man of and minds in SciComm. Through in SciComm and through his freelancing career, he creates science content in various formats with the current focus on podcasting. And next we have Ipsa Jain, a site also edits for artist and illustrator who freelances and goes by the brand Ipsa Wonders. I'm sure a lot of you have attended at least one of her sessions and heard and know about her specialty in zine making. Finally, we have Somdatta Karak today, and who is the Science Communications and Public Engagement Officer at CSIR CCMD, who is at the helm of all outreach activities conducted by CCMD. Most of her efforts involve science communication and the of science education. Thank you all panelists for joining today's panel discussion and agreeing to be a part of it. And also for the audience, I am deliberately keeping the introductions short so you have the opportunity to hear about the panelists by themselves. Okay, let's get to today's discussion then. Like the title says, building solutions to compensate for the lack of for SciComm in India, it is evident that every science communicator in India is struggling alone in this space. It would take another discussion to talk about all the issues themselves, but today's ecosystem focus will be addressing the significant gap that
Okay. We'll
Yeah,
just wait for her to come back.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
um, hi, sorry, I told you my internet is acting up. So, okay, let me just start off. So, yeah, I mean, we were talking about how it's very important as individuals to see and extend, or rather progress this field of science communication until the system has arrived, right? So, at the national level, there is hardly any policy or system, I mean, that is inclusive of this field, although there's this document under discussion, the latest STIP policy that has a specific chapter for building an ecosystem for science communicators. But this still needs a lot of improvement, and it will take some time before it arrives. So, what do we do until then? Or rather, to rephrase it, for better meaning and understanding, how do we catalyze the process of shaping this systemic strategies, right? So that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to put forth a few leads for the discussion, which we will be discussing today. The first that is going to be is each panel member is going to discuss finding their niche in this space and how they're creating their own opportunities. The second being how there are always roadblocks and some that can be overcome, but some not really without the support of the system. And then how the culmination of privilege and having a network and support system will help you push further in this field, at least for now, without the system being in place. And finally, any ideas or solutions that they can that you think can improve the entire SciComm scene in India until the system arrives for our needs. Right. So with this context being set, I'm throwing open the panel for discussion. Um, Okay, let's start with Ipsa, right? So we have known that after your postdoctoral research, you directly dove into becoming a sci artist and have dabbled with multiple projects with governmental and private affiliations. How was it like for you when you started, and why did you see the need for a personal brand to be built?
Right. So thanks, Rajita, for bringing us all together, and thanks to all the viewers who are here on a Sunday evening, giving us their time. I hope this is a useful conversation for you all. So I have to first clarify that my postdoc itself was, a position of an enormous amount of luck and privilege, as you would put it, or even as I would put it, really. My postdoctoral fellowship was unique because in the postdoc lab itself, also I got to work on projects that were related to science visualization and science communication. So, so my journey started a little before that, and it was a lot of random chances that sort of things that happened that led to other things that happened and things that led to more things that happened. So the only contribution from my end was just like trying to work and trying to tell more and more people that, hey, I'm trying to do this work, and that led to more possibilities as the time came, including my postdoctoral fellowship. It was not an open process. I did not really write an application, or I did not write a proposal. What happened was that during a conference, I met Minaj, was my PI during my postdoctoral fellowship, and I just was sharing, rather unloading, about how there are no opportunities for people who would like to do my kind of work in India. And we were actually at a conference where we, met somebody who was doing that kind of work for EMBL in Heidelberg, and so then. after that conversation, because he was in a place where he could create that opportunity, he gave me the chance to work in his lab for 2 years, and that's where I could build both my portfolio and network to a way to a level and place where I now get to do the kind of work I do. Um, so, uh, so that's the story of the luck. And about how I ended up finding my niche, that again is a more sort of a decision that I arrived at by elimination. I knew for sure that I wanted to tell stories of science, but at that point of time, I did not have any belief in my writing capabilities, and drawing was something that I'd always liked, and that led to me starting out as a science illustrator. But how I look at my own work has also, of course, evolved just because of the opportunities I've had so far. But when it comes to carving out the niche, I think what helped me at that time in the beginning was that there were very few people in the circle that I was a part of who were trying to do this kind of work. So that meant that people were always excited when I told them that, hey, I'm trying to draw science. So there was an initial excitement, at least in my very close, limited circle. And like it usually happens, your first opportunities as a freelancer tend to come from your, uh, you know, um, first degree circle. People who know you well are the ones who will end up paying you for your first gig, and that's what happened for me as well. And when it came to finding the niche, eventually, I think what really again helped was that I am in a place like Bangalore where I have been part of both the IISc campus and both and the NCBS in STEM campus. So that meant that I had the possibilities of interacting with all kinds of scientists and a large body of scientists, which meant that the possibility of getting gigs from there was higher. And so that was again something about network that helped me get the kind of opportunities that I've gotten. Yeah, and to be honest, like I have gotten most of my opportunities by word from of mouth rather than social media and so on. Uh, at least I like to think so. Maybe I'm wrong. Aashima can tell me how she found out about me. So, like, I also got to work with a lot of people here. I've worked with Somdatta, I've worked with Aashima, and I don't know if I worked with Shreya, but I certainly did some small gigs with India Bioscience. So, in fact, I think that was probably the third or the fourth paying gig I got at the beginning of my career. And why I needed a personal brand is because it allows me to create my own independent work. Of course, I have had the privilege of working with amazing collaborators and clients, and some not so amazing collaborators and clients. But I also needed the space to kind of create my own work. I'm like Suchita mentioned, I'm crazy about zines. I make a lot of zines, and I have done quite a few of them in collaboration. But I also have a lot of independent body of work, and I self-publish them and then put them out in the world for people to buy. I'm sorry, just remind me if I'm taking more time. And that that brand allows me to sustain that, and I sell them, and people beyond the academic circles are also an audience that I've been able to cultivate with that brand. So yeah, that's been great as well. Yeah. Thank you. I'm not going to take more time. I have become old person who speaks a lot kind of personality. So I'm just going to pass on the mic.
I think while we are waiting for Suchita to come back, maybe Ipsa, you could continue to
No, no. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the next
introduce.
person, which is Shreya. So now, Shreya, maybe you can take the mic and talk about, your journey.
I guess I put my foot in there. Thanks, Ipsa. Yeah, while we wait for Suchita, maybe I can just continue. And uh, I guess I was incredibly lucky in my journey in that I have had a pretty conventional path, and I have almost had a paid full time position, which would enable me to practice my craft, which is not at all something that's common in this field. I think I had spoken about it during my session. The way I started, I also have a background in academia. So I think halfway through my PhD, I was pretty sure that I did not want an academic career. But at that time, I had very little idea that something like the field of SciComm even existed. And this is, I think, quite some time ago. So I like the fact that we are much more open now to the possibility of such transitions. And writing is something that has always been a part of my life, like since I was 10 or so. Like, I didn't particularly know that I wanted to write about science at that point, but after discovering my love for science during my PhD and finding a way to merge these two together is something that drove me initially. And what helped me was one, doing a lot of research, like spending hours on Google, reading articles, reading about people who have gone before you. You may not find people with exactly the sort of experience that you're looking for, but reading about others who have taken steps in similar directions is something that helped me a lot, just knowing that possibilities exist. And also, you often find advice and tips and tricks that come in useful at the most surprising of times. You don't know at the time that it's going to come in useful, but years later, something clicks into place often. And that helped me. So by the time I finished my PhD, I had 3 years of experience in science writing. And that was very helpful when I went to the next stage where I wanted a full term time position to gain experience. And the India Bioscience, again, there's a lot of luck in this story. And the India Bioscience position happened to be advertised at right that moment when I wanted to move to Bangalore. I wanted a career in science communication, and all of these came together. And Inter Bioscience was an incredible learning experience, not just because I got to practice SciComm in the way through writing and editing, but also the number of people I could meet. And I think this is something we will talk about today later on, the importance of building a network, the importance of finding peers, finding people to give you feedback, people to suggest ideas or to take you forward on your ideas. And that's something India Bioscience gave me. And I guess now I am again at a transition point and I'm moving into the next stage of my career, which is likely to be an institutional position. And another thing that has helped me, I guess, find my place is uh, always keeping what do you call it, not a list, but always having an idea of everything that you have done, all the disparate sort of experiences that you may have had that you may think may have nothing to do with where you are planning to go, but they come in useful again at all sorts of times. So it's important not to undervalue any part of your experience. Like if I volunteered at some conference in the first year of my PhD, that experience helped me like 6 years later in doing something else. So it's always useful to keep exposing yourself to learning opportunities is something that I have learned. And so, yeah, that's my story in a nutshell. And again, I think I can just go ahead and nominate the next person to speak after me. So I'll just pick the first name on my screen, which is Spoorthy. So please go ahead, Spoorthy.
Yeah, thanks, Shreya, and thanks to everybody who's taking their time out on a Sunday to listen to all of us. I think Shreya and Ipsa kind of covered what it takes to jump in to be a science communicator. So I don't have necessarily a lot of things to add. Just that for me, like Shreya said, I had the privilege of starting off as a full timer in SciComm with research matters, and that was again not something that was a career in my head. I jumped into science writing from an engineering background. I was working with a IT tech company before I did the jump. So and again, that was like it's a culmination of luck, because I do remember when I applied to be a science writer for what was then called the Science Media Center at IISc. We had this application. During this application process, I had submitted my quote unquote samples, and I hadn't heard back. And then I just wrote to follow it up, and then I got to know that my application was just like lost, and then it's resurfaced, and that's how I ended up being a science writer to start my career. And then again in April of 2016, Sandhya, who is now at Monga Bay, India, but was then at Science Media Center at IAC, she was like the managing editor then. She had to go on a break, and then that's when I kind of stepped up to write a little more. And without much of an experience, it was just handed to me on a platter to be the managing editor. And then Research Matters was born in November of 2016. So, and then since then, there's been no looking back, and I've never really been a freelancer back then. So much of my work was like self-edited, I would say. It's self-motivated, self-edited, whatever you want to call it. I had this whole playing field for myself to just do what I wanted. I had the freedom to do that. So a lot of a privilege also came in, because I didn't have to like stick to a, what do you say, like a 9 to 5 job. I had the ability to kind of do a lot of things. But right now, since last, yeah, maybe since the beginning of this year, I've made another transition as well, and now stepping into the shoes of freelancers to see how this kind of the world is. Because sitting on the other side of the table, it's been like I could call the shots, but right now probably a lot of things depend on who calls the shots on the other side of the table, like who commissions my pieces, where I send my pictures, etc. So that's a very different kind of a journey, I would say, so far. I've been successful in writing for a few publications, and each of that has been a tremendous learning experience, tremendous a kind of experience that I've never faced before. Working with different editors has given me different insights into what encompasses science writing. I still don't call myself a full-fledged journalist, because there is little, there's not too much to say that I've been a journalist as such. No big exposés or whatever that I can call, but I'm like trying to tread that path right now. So the other thing that I found myself into since the last year is writing about something that I'm very passionate about, which is like my pet. That's something which opened up again serendipitously. I knew a lot of science that went into what dogs, what canine behavior is and what makes dogs nice pets. I should confess that I don't know much about cats, but I know a lot of dogs, and that is my interest as well. And kept reading books, whatever, and opened up a new whole world to me to realize that a lot of behavior that we see among dogs is something that is not very typical of what we see told to us to be dog behaviors. So this kind of opened up, and then there was this opportunity for me to write for Deccan Herald about this. And being the science writer that I am, I kind of combine my love for pets and having a pet at home, having a lot of stories that go back to my childhood, and bringing some dimensions of science. So that was something I think was a niche playing field for me again, and I'm really privileged to be writing that, because I know a lot of people who have pets and who have probably better stories to write, but here I am with the pen. So yeah, that's something that I think has been quite another kind of learning about column writing, which I think gives a lot of a personal space to be like expose your thoughts and your experiences with your readers, so to say. The others, I don't know if I'm running out of time, but I just take another minute to just say that this year has been very experimental for me with books. So recently I had one of mine come up, which is about, it's a kid's book about India's adventures in space. And that was another whole, writing for kids is a whole genre I had never done before. Most of my writing has been for adults. So this genre kind of gave me an increased appreciation of what it takes to write for a children's book. And I should say this much harder than what it would be for writing for adults. So it's again a great learning experience, and I'm really grateful for my publisher to giving me this opportunity, and for the illustrator who kind of worked with me, because as science writers, we tend to be very specific on certain things and to kind of maintain some accuracy in what goes in. And I've been working on another book, which is like taking forever, but anyway, about scientists and some of their work, which I will probably talk about it when it's the right time. But yeah, so writing books is another thing that I found very intellectually very satisfying for me. It doesn't pay you a lot in my experience, and of course it's not something that it requires a lot of motivation also, because you need to push yourself to write a book which will take for like a long time. And unlike newsy articles, which you probably take a couple of days or maybe 3-4 days and get it done, but this is not like that. So my experiences have been really rewarding so far. So with that, thank you so much, and I'll probably nominate the next person, Somdatta.
Hi everyone. So my my foray out of academia probably started when I was writing my PhD thesis, and I started visiting various labs across the world for potential postdoc offers, because until then I had a very structured academic career, like where I thought that I'll do a master's and a PhD and a postdoc, and then I'll figure out what to do in life. But then when I started visiting labs for postdoc offers, thankfully the realization dawned upon me that I was not excited about any of those labs. And, and then upon deliberating upon it myself, I realized that the labs were doing fantastic work. I just did not relate with those because I did not see myself doing addressing any of those questions in the long term. I did not feel that I was going to add anything new to it. And that compelled me to think of then what niche I can create, or I would like to create. And and at that point, I thought that I would like to create my niche in science education. And thankfully, during my undergrad studies, I had worked with Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, and that was the only space for science education that I had known about. And in addition to that, in like a couple of years back when I was visiting India, I had seen a big hoarding of Teach for India. And so for me, there were only two options. Either I work with Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education. It was a space that I was kind of familiar with, and Teach for India that I was completely unfamiliar with. And I felt that HBCSE is a very academic space, and I wanted to be in a space where I can work at the grassroots, really understand what it means to work with students. And I felt Teach for India would provide me that opportunity. And I was in Germany when I was applying for all of this, which means that I missed all their in person interactions. And I must confess that me joining Teach for India Fellowship was a leap of faith, and it could have gone totally haywire. And I was just plain lucky that it was a worthwhile decision to have taken. Now, during the Teach for India Fellowship, basically every fellow is encouraged to think of what new they would like to add in the education system while they are working as a full-time teacher in one of the schools that Teach for India will appoint you in. And they also expect that after these 2 years, you will go back to the space where you came from. So for me, that would mean that after 2 years, I'm supposed to go back into academic space. And that was a complete nonsense for me at that point, because to me going back to academia would mean that you need a postdoc degree or something. I mean, at that point, at least in India, I did not know of anybody who could go back to academia without having a stellar academic performance. And if I stopped short of academia just after my 4 years of PhD, there was no way I was going to make it into it. At least I did not understand how to go about it at all. Thankfully, in my second year of Teach for India Fellowship, I again got a chance to work with Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, and I I mean, at least I could foray into understanding what experiential learning means. But at the same time, when the fellowship ended and I was applying for jobs that open up for usual Teach for India fellows, EdTech was a really upcoming thing, and I realized that everybody in these EdTech companies, I mean, of course, they were interested in Teach for India fellows, but then I was not the only fellow. There were so many other fellows, and they were interested in fellows who not only understand education, but they also know how to code because these are tech companies. And I had done zero coding. So, and at the same time, I was also, like, me and my partner were in different continents at that point, and every time, and these would be mostly startups, ed tech startups. So even if interviews that went a little, I mean, that seemed a little promising when they would ask me, so when can you join? And my answer would invariably be, yes, like right now I'm looking at different options and whatever, I'll need time to figure out. And that did not work at all with the startup space. So then I was like, okay, fine, whatever happened, happened. Thankfully, I have the privilege to take a break, and I'll go back to Germany and chill with my partner, and I'll figure out what to do. And what happened in this meantime is that my PhD advisor got to know that I was going to be back to the country, basically to the same town, and he had an offer for 6 months or so as a postdoc, and he thought because I already knew things in the lab, I could be a good fit and also easier for him because he doesn't have to look for somebody for such a short period. And he was a wonderful person, so I could be completely open with him that I'm going to use this only as a stopgap arrangement. I have no intention of being in academia, which also means that in these 6 months or whatever, I'm going to do a lot of soul searching and job searching and all kinds of searching to figure out my own niche. And he was completely okay about it. And that opened up the possibility of me interning with a platform that was very fresh and new at that point, which is called Club SciRio. And I was one of the earliest writers, and my first assignment for them was to write a weekly newsletter. Okay, so every weekend I would publish a newsletter for them, and the newsletter would have things that people like me, basically PhDs and postdocs, would find useful for their careers. So, career well being, career opportunities, all kinds of things. And while I used to research for that newsletter, I came across the positions called as science communicators in many Western countries at that point. And I was like, cool, yeah, I mean, this kind of fits all the right boxes. And I mean, so Teach for India always told me that I should go back to academia because I belong there, and I did not know how to do that. Maybe this is how I should do that. But then, and then, like, whatever months later, I moved back to India and I started talking to people. I applied to places like India Bioscience and I got rejected, by the way. And and I came back to India and I realized that people were terribly unhappy with how these positions run. And some people even left their job and left for other countries because they were that dissatisfied with how the job is. And so I was, of course, not the most happy to know about this, but then I think I had enough privileges to stay put up and at least see what happens. And so we moved to Hyderabad, and Hyderabad had just opened up its TIFR Hyderabad campus. It was fresh and new, and it had Professor Jayashree Ramdas, who was the ex-director of Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education. So you see, all those privileges come in handy. And then I wrote to her because she is an educator herself. She valued my Teach for India fellowship, and I started interning with her. And I could intern without thinking of money at the point, and I interned for a good 6 long months, and which is something I openly acknowledge. And during that internship, I also got familiar with the school space in Hyderabad, and Hyderabad is a new city for me, so people here did not know me. I did not know anybody here other than this TIFR community. Also, I was a TIFR student during my master's, so all those things help. So I interned with her, and I was almost contemplating joining TIFR Hyderabad. And as luck would have it, CCMB got to know about me, and they asked me to come and meet them. And it just worked out much better. And CCMB looked like a much more established place for me. And also because it's a life science space, unlike TIFR, which has all kinds of disciplines, I thought CCMB would be a much smoother space for me to be in. and yeah, and then it was. I was lucky that it was very smooth, and I hope that things are as smooth for others too. Yeah. Okay, so Abhishek, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Somdatta. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel. Thank you, Suchita, for inviting me and all of us here. The first thing I'd like to say is that I really empathize with Somdatta's, dilemma of being from academia, having some interests related to it, but wanting to channel it in a different direction and finding out that the usual routes don't usually let you go anywhere back other than, take a U-turn and go back into academia. And it's a hard personal decision to try and break out of that mold, especially in a place like India, which does not have a mature science communication ecosystem. These kind of decisions require a lot of personal courage, and a lot of privilege, as Samdata mentioned, goes into how you weigh these decisions. I've had the good fortune in many different ways of my passion for the life sciences and for biology being supported by a lot of different people, by my parents, who were able to economically support me to the point that I could complete a master's outside India in the US. And that's the first main thing, that I had an early exposure to a mature scientific ecosystem and a science communication ecosystem like it exists in the US. That really broadened my horizons. Like a lot of people have mentioned here before, reading about other people, exposure to the right kind and range of science communication really helps you understand what's possible, and seeing the roots of the people who went through to do those science communication articles or pieces or whatnot also tells you how all over the world also science communication is a field that works only because people from many different kinds of fields jump into it at various points in their careers, and the synergy helps a lot. Because science needs to be talked about in so many different ways, unpackaged in so many different ways, because it's a very complex thing, right? It's so many different disciplines of scientific endeavor all tied together by the fact that the tax-paying public has to support them, or private individuals with money have to support them, and the motivations for supporting different kinds of science are always different. Do you want basic research? Do you want applied research? Do you want to help the world right now or help it 25 years down the road? Or think about how science is going to help the world 25 years down the road. So it's a mess of so much good and bad, and trying to tell people who are not in science about it, who are the ones whose money and decisions affect how science runs, that's a very convoluted connection, but it has to be made. And so that's why it takes so many courageous decisions in your career and so many non-standard paths to try and get into this. So the second thing I'd like to point out is I've been incredibly lucky in terms of my life partner, Shruti Muralidhar, who is the other half of SciComm, which is the science communication collective that me, Shruti, and another friend, Navneet Vasishtha, founded. At this time, Shruti and I are the ones who are continuing this ahead. The reasons I shifted into science communication itself personally are because I had a lot of exposure as a teaching assistant during my master's and my time in the US at the University of Utah. Professors there supported me, not just as a teaching assistant, but also to try and improve curricula. That was when I realized that, teaching it in one way was not the be all and end all of how you pass on information, thinking about a deficit model of communication, but also a perspective and, the emotional, the connections that you have with your area of interest and the passion that other people have. Trying to find a bridge between that meant that you had to change the ways in which you talk to people. Every situation called for a different way of making that connection with another human being, which is what you want to do. It just happens to be about science. That's all. And so that formative connection with teaching and improving teaching really helped me. And that's what I've used to sort of push forward with science communication. Shruti has a very strong presence in social media on Twitter. And that was the reason we used Twitter as our native hub for science communication. It really helped that SciComm could start off as a social media native science communication platform, because of which we weren't limited by what sort of area of science communication we could touch. So I tried to take as many personal interests that I had, that Shruti had, and other collaborators with us had, to try and look at as many different media as possible. So I started writing out because that's what I have an interest in. But I was a classically trained vocalist. And so I understood the power of voice and audio and decided that podcasting was also a place that we could go into. So these sort of things helped. A lot of personal history and a lot of privilege from before helped me to try and find easy, smooth landings, as Somdatta put, into areas that I knew I could effectively contribute to. So these are the things that have led me here till now. Another important point is my exposure to MIT's practices for science communication. I was involved with helping with private philanthropic donorship. And how to support donors at that level. I was working with the Director of Development, the Office of Development at the Picard Institute for Learning and Memory, where Shruti was also working. Again, see, social networks and connections help to get where you are. But I was working double duty as both as a science writer and as the assistant for the Director of Development. So it helped me look at both the perspectives, trying to connect with scientists inside your organization to try and package their work in a way that would work with a general audience, and also handling high net worth individuals and finding out how to connect their passions with how science was being run and how their money and time and effort and how the scientists' efforts could be put together in a really nice way. So finally, all of this stuff has made me sort of look at science communication in this way. It's like an elevator pitch every time. Imagine you have a very high net worth individual, a billionaire, standing next to you in that lift, and you have 5 minutes. The amount of care, passion, and energy you will try and bring into that conversation, because you know how much that could affect the scientific endeavor you're trying to support. That's the kind of respect I want to generate for every member of the audience. Because unless you do that, you'll never push yourself to the point where you think your individual piece of science communication, whatever it is, can be transformative enough that it will change somebody's life. It will. It definitely will. All our work stay online forever, right? And so all of us do that these days. So that's what I've tried to hold on to, despite the fact that we have to run in SciComm under different structures. We've been pro bono for a lot of time because we both struggled with being under US visas that are very restrictive in terms of how you derive payments and so on. I've not had the occasion to work for pay before, so I just had to do it pro bono. I've realized that's an important thing to do in and of itself. But I have to admit that I was restricted in some ways by my life situations to do that. So yeah, this is my journey here. One important thing I'd like to point out and reiterate that Sujita mentioned at the beginning of our introduction is that, yeah, we're all here talking about the fact that we've all had different ways to find tiny hacks, our own personal hacks and ways to make sure that we've had a foothold into the system. I know a lot of other people in the panel also have the same notion that we've all, by accident or by privilege or by life situations and connecting our interests to them, forged our own paths in here. But it is not easy, and the system in India especially, and in the world at large also, is not very conducive to doing science communication. But I think it's important to stress that systemic change is important, and it has to come from people who are closer in access to power and money. And the onus shouldn't be on the individuals who have the least amount of power, and also have to create the material that has to be pushed in terms of science communication. So yeah, that's what I'd like to say for now. And I definitely want to push the mic on to somebody else. Aashima, why don't you take over?
Thanks, Abhishek. Hi, everybody. Really nice to be here and have you. I don't see you, but It's nice to get in touch again. I'm again looking forward to all the questions you will have. And thanks everybody who spoke before me. I think like we know each other, like some of you I know better and some not so good, but it's nice to hear of everybody's journeys and get to know you better, because I think what we're doing here really is laying the foundation for ourselves and also the participants. At least we're trying to do that, and I hope we're successful, because like it has been said, it's not so easy to do this discipline in India. And there are many ways, and of course privilege always helps, but you also have to be, I think, a little bit careful about um, two things about privilege, I think. To like have it work for you, so be able to do what you really want in all sincerity, and also if you have this privilege, to like pay it forward, to make sure this privilege is for every is extended to as many people as possible, because right now it's not an equitable scene at all. It's not a level playing field, and this is not just based on gender, but also in the context of India, caste. And while we're talking communication, it's also about the language that we use to exchange. So these things are important, and yeah, my privileges have been immense also. And like I grew up in Mumbai, so I learned my science, and I went to school with English language, and also my family was well to do, so I could go abroad to do a master's degree. In terms of motivation, I was not, I was in the lab briefly during my master's degree. I studied biotechnology at Dr. D.Y. Patil Vidyapeeth in New Bombay. And then, I mean, I also had the privilege, like privilege works many ways, right? So now I realize that not many people have the right mentors. And I was privileged to have like some nice teachers who recognized my potential or interest in science and society. So, we were in the lab doing science, but my mind was always a little bit like, but what does this mean for this community, or what does this mean for the world, or where will this fit in our modern world? And I was asking these kind of things. And also in school, I started a really lame student magazine, so I always had this like media angle, and I was really liked science. So I very consciously chose science communication. And when I Googled those words, what I got was like people have mentioned already, other speakers, it was a foreign discipline, right? It comes from the West, or at least how we are understanding it. This is not true. We also have, I think, Indian SciComm since many years. But what is the most accessible? Sorry about baby sounds, or you're welcome about baby sounds. Cheers! Yeah, and yeah, so I chose science communication. So after, when I spent some time in the lab, like Somdatta was saying, I also felt like this is not really the place for me. Even though the questions were very interesting and I was very impressed with the work that was happening, I still felt like I'm not going to be able to contribute much more here. So I actively chose to study science communication. So that was my second master's degree. And yeah, I can very easily say, it's not that important, which I really believe. Like it didn't, my science communication master's degree, which I did in England, didn't help me so much in terms of like training. I learned most of the things I know on the job, but it definitely helps you get ahead. And for people to recognize that your interest is sincere and you're committed and so on. Yeah, so this is where my journey started, and this was in 2010 when I did a 1-year master's in science communication. And after that, I was working for a print newspaper, and then started the hustle we are all trying to figure out of freelancing. And just before that, I also edited a children's science magazine after I had some experience. It was called The Brainwave, and during the session, we talked a bit about that. And once Brainwave was finished, like it closed down, actually, the magazine, very sad, actually, because it was a really good one and we really enjoyed it to make it. And this was 2015 when me and Nandita, who were both working on Brainwave, again had the privilege of like having had a stable, like proper job. So we had some money in the bank that we could rely on. So there was some savings that we could spend. And cool, nice to hear, Somdatta, that you know about this. Yeah, and this is when we started the lab hopping journeys after Brainwave ended, because it was very dense work and very intense to do that for more than a year. So me and Nandita, we partnered up and decided to do something that we wanted. And we had already while we were working together, decided that we'd like to do a blog together. We'd like to collab together. And that was the beginning of the Life of Science and my freelancing journey. And now it's been 6 years, and we're going strong, I'd like to think, but not so strong, which I've been asked to mention because like I really appreciate that a lot of people on this panel are freelancers, and it's kind of an indie panel. Now with Shreya and Spoorthy also in the freelance world, it's nice to like talk about like how do we get through this hustle, because we all have our different ways, and yes, it's really hard to I think there are many challenges. One has been always to be able to like pay ourselves and still do the work that we want to do and stay true to that. And for this, I think you have to be a little flexible. Like, so there were a lot of spin-off projects from the Life of Science. There's a book, and there is the calendar, which we use for crowdfunding that we do every year. And so I mean it's in the spin-off projects that we try to kind of bring some money together that we can sustain. I know Research Matters also had or still has a very interesting model to keep doing what's important while also bringing in the money. So you have to be creative about this. And because like Abhishek also said, it's not a very it's not very established. There is no very like an organization or a ministry that is directly helping us. There is an intention of yes, we need a strong SciComm ecosystem, but we are really not there yet. And like from the work that I do, I know that it's not worth like waiting for this help to come. We really have to put in the work ourselves. And I would advise all of you, if you want to get ahead in SciComm, to stay open and come together and like make a good community where we can benefit from each other's work and inspirations, because this is really we're working sort of in a without any help or ideas, which is also kind of helpful, because we can go in the direction that we need to go or want to go. So it's the jury still out about what Indian SciComm is, and it can be so many things, and there are many gaps like this. The one gap, like, so about talking about carving a niche, what me and Nandita wanted to do, and then we work as a collective, and Ipsa is also part of this, is to kind of change how we have been thinking about science, because there are many dominant social paradigms that we have to deal with, which we felt from the onset that was not really helpful for what we set out to do. So we had the desire to hear femme stories of science, where women are featured or other genders are featured, or science which is not very highly funded, but science that happens in your backyard, science that's crucial for a city to function smoothly, science that allows the ecosystem of our cities to be maintained and sustained. Those kind of stories we wanted to hear. So, I mean, I don't know like what exactly, if it's not very sophisticated, but like staying true to yourself and finding a space to do what what is important to you. But while you do that, please also ask yourself, let's keep doing that, but why we want to do that. Like, why do you want to write this kind of story and not another kind? What is needed for the ecosystem or for where you're going? Something I tried to say during the session a lot was, you're not going to write just one story. You're going to write many. You're going to make a lot of work. Right, so you can play the slow game and take your time and figure out how you want it. But please do bring yourself in to what you're doing very earnestly. And yeah, good luck. And yeah, looking forward to your questions.
Uh,
Why don't you go ahead with what you just proposed?
yeah,
You're
you
on
are
mute.
muted, Abhishek.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure everybody got that. So I just want to quickly put some specific tips out there, keeping in line with what Aashima mentioned already, in terms of how you need to earnestly put yourself out there. There are lots of systemic problems that we can't directly deal with right now, but you have to still carve out your career. And so if you've made the jump into SciComm, then you have to try to do some things. So one thing I'd like to point out at this time is in SciComm, which is the organization Shruti and I run, and SciRio, which is what Suchita runs, and SciComm Club, which is what Siddharth Kankaria spearheads. We have a database of Indian SciComm practitioners that we've been running for a while now. It sort of grew out of previous efforts that were already there for some sort of a database, because there was the database on the Confluence platform by the Indian Academy of Sciences that we took some inspiration from, but we wanted to add a lot more usable details along with people who were listed as science communicators. And we also wanted to think about how science communication was split between, like Aashima mentioned, the indie group of freelancers and independent producers and creators versus institutional science communication people. And so the database, I'd like to put down the link over here. Let me try that. Yeah, that's the link for it. Am I doing that right? Let me just make sure. Yeah, I think you can still click on that and go. But okay, I'll try and put that list down again.
It's not public.
Okay, this is not public. I'll try and copy the link. Let's see now. Okay, hopefully that works. Okay, so yeah, we've been trying to get a lot of people onto this. There's a Google form you can add your information into, and we make sure that people have at least 2 authenticated works of science communication in whatever media before we include people on here. And this is an attempt to sort of get enough information together that editors can take a look at and find people they want to write for their publications. Writers can search for collaborators. Artists can search for collaborators. It's whoever is working in whatever media in Indian science communication, we want them to be able to know about each other. And that's, some amount of basic information transfer has to happen. Otherwise, the system can't coalesce around all the people who need to be supported in there. I'd like to give a thumbs up to India Bioscience and the efforts that they're doing. It's a nice example of a private public collaboration because there's welcome trust and the government of India and the funds and efforts are pooled together. I think that's a good starting step. I don't know if there are similar things for the other sciences, because India Bioscience is mostly about biology, but it would be nice to see similar ventures. In line with that, if all the science communicators need to up their game and try and get a stronger foothold in the system while such public-private partnerships come about and we all try to push ahead with the sort of change that we want. And I believe in SciComm, as I'm remembering this right, we've also put together a SciComm letter for inclusivity and change that was supported by a lot of people in the Indian SciComm field, which sort of culminated in a change.org petition. And we talked about more of these things because Shruti represented in SciComm in the PSA organized brainstorming session. Let me see. That happened in Jan 2019. And so based on that, we also tried to put together a policy memo because as Suchita mentioned, STIP 2020 was going on and they were soliciting opinions for how the field needs to change and all that. You can check these out on our website, SciComm.blog. So for the ideas that you want to do in order to sort of get ahead in the game, one thing is please pitch both inside and outside India. Even if you're writing about things that are within India, pitch outside and inside. That's really important because, if your current demographic market is not mature enough, shoot for other markets. There's really not a problem. And reporting on local specific areas that you are a part of gives you an added advantage. So you should try for those. In line with that, please, I know it's a problem, but please try to minimize ghostwriting as much as possible. I just wanted to put this out there. I know it's a difficult thing when you're asked to write for an organization on a SciComm piece, for example, but they insist that you ghostwrite and that credit will not be given to you as the author of the piece or as the creator of the material because they want to say it's from our own company or our own organization. Please try to minimize that. I know it's a difficult ask because sometimes you don't have the power to make those decisions and have the kind of leverage to talk about this. But if more transparency has to come into the field, we have to do these things. And as much as possible, also in line with transparency, if you're running social media handles online, please identify the people running those handles because we need to know who is expressing opinions that happen on social media. Communication gets really difficult and nuanced sometimes. And if we don't know who is behind a certain name or a handle, it's very hard to try and understand what sort of conversation is happening and what the motivations are behind these and so on. The last two things I'd like to say and finish off are you can use the Open Notebook, which is a really wonderful resource for science communicators. It may be more towards writers, but I'm sure it has resources for other science communicators as well. That's one. It's just the opennotebook.com. And the second one is please try and use the resources that are present on the MIT Night Science Journalism website. That's ksj.mit.edu/resources. And I'll put these links down here. These are, again, examples of places in the US where these organizations or science communication collectives have a lot of resources that freelancers and science communicators who are starting out can really use. And take advantage of. Particularly the pitch database on Open Notebook is really important when you want to see what different outlets want, what has already succeeded over there, and how people have managed to get their works through in there. It gives you a lot of confidence and the ability to make equivalent or competitive pitches when you're putting your pieces out there for publication. Yeah, that's all I have, and I'm going to put down the links down here in the chat. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm going next as nominated. So just changing, rather shifting the gears a bit here, as Suchita wanted me to talk about the multilingualism in science communication. And Research Matters, when I was there, had a ventured into science communication and writing articles and doing some bit of podcasts and other types of content in other languages as well. So we had about 5 other languages apart from English, where we were, trying to like get the science content out. And I just wanted to share my experience out there. Like everybody on the panel recognizes, being able to converse in English and have this discussion in English itself is a privilege. And in India, for example, the numbers just say that about 10% of the country can actually read and write and understand the language that is English. So we still have a 90% out there who can't do what we can do or take it for granted. So that means to say we will need innovative ways of taking science in other languages. And one crucial thing that most people are doing right now is taking what is already in English into other languages through translation or transcreation, so that the message out is going out there, in the best way possible. Best way in the sense what we know, what English speaking people can say is the best way. But that doesn't have to be really the way it should be. There could be a more focused efforts in regional languages coming from the grassroots, that are better suited for the audience. We don't necessarily have to take content from English and do that way. But the only problem there that we have realized is that while there's a lot of demand for regional content, creators are very few. And why I say this, because most of the people who are graduating right now, or people who want to do SciComm, or even know that SciComm is an option, are pretty much graduates who have studied their whatever subjects in English. So and for some of us, it is also possible because of different moves to different places across the world. You lose the touch with your native tongue. Maybe you do speak it at home, but not everybody that you speak with actually speaks with you in a native tongue that is very relevant to your audience. So one of the things that I did mention during the session is the best way to communicate science in a regional language is to try to do it within your known circles, in a language that is known to you, which is not English, because that is your first playground. So doing that in itself is hard. So if you are looking at multilingual science communication, I would say that there is demand. Doing that is hard. Finding people to do it is also hard. So you will have to look into nook and corners who have really good command over the language, can really do what they want to do, and also understand science and how that is done. The other thing also I want to mention is uh, this is not just a problem with India that I realize, but it is across the board in many other parts of quote unquote developing world or third world or whatever you want to call that, is that people who do this vital work of taking science into regional languages are very underpaid. Even in India, that I understand is you pay, even like major newspapers, like in Kannada, for example, a language that I'm quite familiar with, pays you about say 100, 200 rupees for a full, like a full blown article in science. Uh, Look at what the difference that would be when you're writing for an English medium. So English medium uh, writing starts with around say it runs in thousands. I will say that if not thousands, it at least run in thousands. So in regional languages, that is not the kind of pay that you are paid, and many outreach outlets expect you to do it pro bono. So how we tackle that is a question I think we seriously have to consider and kind of foray into. But I just want to kind of sensitize that this is a problem. Communicating in regional language is necessary, but is also ridden with a challenge of its own kind, and it's a big elephant in the room. So that's all I have to add. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Spoorthy. I'll sort of now really change the conversation again based on Suchita's recommendation. So this is about building a community, something that we all spoke about. I mean, writers in some sense have also a little more privilege, that at least they have more spaces and more opportunities as compared to illustrators, artists, and practitioners who work in different media. And And even when we engage with different bodies or different scientists, individuals as freelancers, there are a lot of issues we face. I mean, not just with respect to money, but about ownership of work or about the way we are treated and so on. There have been so many times that where scientists have either assumed that we are hobbyists and not professionals, and other such things. So what some of us did recently is we organized something we call as SciArt Town Hall, where we asked the community to come up and raise raise concerns or share good experiences that they have had in their short or long journeys. We invited people who are either just starting out or have been in the space for a while, or any spectrum in between. And then through an open dialogue, we sort of jotted down some of the common themes and common issues that we face as a community, and then we have started to work towards building resources and material, which is not only to be shared amongst the community, but also shared with people who work with us. So the reason that the scientific bodies or the scientists interact with us in the way they do is because interacting with freelancers is perhaps a very new kind of paradigm for them, and they probably just don't understand how this interaction has to go, and this is not just a transaction that you are making at a supermarket or something like that. So we want to change how people think about this, and so we're trying to come up with a good practice document which will serve communities across the table, and make this a more sort of fertile space for the newcomers, particularly. I mean, we have all had to struggle through. I felt at a point of time I didn't have mentors. I still sometimes feel like I don't have mentors, but I have had the good fortune of finding good peers, and I have had support from the larger science communication community. So we want to sort of have a more concrete material so that we can support the large emerging sort of body of SciArt practitioners in India, and hopefully after a point there'll be enough numbers of us that people will look at us with the same sort of legit respect that they look at writers with. So that's the hope. Yeah. Thank you.
Uh,
There are two questions in the chat. Maybe we can um, address that. Somebody mentions us about something about ghostwriting. Uh, wow. So some writer maybe who understands ghostwriting can answer this question.
Sorry, I'm not able to see the question.
So there's a chat, Q&A, polls, raised hand,
Oh, got it.
panel.
I
Yeah.
see, I see.
Maybe I'll just
Um,
read out the question, and it might be whoever wants to take it may do
sure.
so. So the question is from Ritu, and she's asking with respect to ghostwriting being mentioned, and Suchita also brought up how guest posts with mentions in a website with permission from the publisher is a way people can go. Oh, good, it's on the screen now.
Great.
So I think the question is about understanding the process of ownership of work and how do you do that?
Right. I'm happy to jump in since I already brought it out first, and I have to grapple with the consequences of bringing this topic up. But anyway, ghostwriting is just when you don't get the credit for being the author of whatever piece of creation that you've done. This can be in any media. You could have created an audio piece, a piece of art, writing, whatever it is, but it's more well known in writing, and it's an established practice because some companies, organizations, etc., demand that you ghostwrite for them. So they'll pay you a set amount of money. They'll take your work, but you cannot ever say that it is something that you've written, because they want to just use the fact that their organization's brand will take the benefit of whatever that writing or that piece of SciComm does. And you will not be allowed to use that for your personal benefit in terms of career growth for yourself, for other people to know that you're capable of this, for an improvement in the kind of pay that you can negotiate for because people know you've written something of this standard before, or that your writing or your SciArt or your podcast is of such a level that a third organization has paid you money in order to represent them. That shows that a certain level of trust is being placed in you as a communicator. So yeah, it's best not to try and get into a situation where you have to agree to ghostwriting. Some of the ways in which you can do this are, as people have already mentioned on this panel, establish your own brand. It's very easy these days to start a blog or a website, go to WordPress or Squarespace or whatever you like, start your own website and put your pieces there, some pieces at least, a few representative pieces like making a portfolio, and clearly say that you've created this piece and put it under a certain copyright, like Creative Commons, for example. Creative Commons is a very nice copyright platform these days that's internationally recognized. One, people will know the caliber of work you're capable of. Two, clients can be shown this work, so they will know what you're capable of. And three, use social media to publicize your works so that lots of people know that you are the author of this work and you're capable of doing that. Connected with the use of Creative Commons and creating a rep on social media, it means that other people will benefit from putting your name on their organization's communication, rather than saying, you know what, let's take your name off because nobody knows you and we're going to put our organization's name because that's what's going to help us. So you have to grow your brand enough in a certain way that it is to the organization's benefit to try and mention your name rather than not. Most of the times the arguments are you're not as well known. And there are easy ways to break that barrier these days. You can establish your own social media presence. You can create your own brand, put out a few works on your website and publicize them. Engage people on topics that are important to you about science communication, about equity in the discipline, about transparency in pay rates. These are all things that will help the field move ahead and will also give you a leg up. So yeah, sorry, I took up a lot of time, but this is what I had to say about ghost creation.
Yeah, I want to add here a different point of view. In fact, I'm not very opposed to ghostwriting, especially when it is.
Hi, can you all by any chance hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Suchita.
Okay, awesome. I'll keep my video off and just lead on. I'm extremely very sorry about the audio issues and the internet issues here. But we have another question that we need to be addressed. So this question comes from
Okay,
Sarah Hyderikpal.
sorry,
So
sorry.
for
Can
all of the
I
panel
finish?
members, with any one or two of you can address this. So how would you describe your target audience, and how do you keep a finger on the pulse of your audience? How do you keep them excited and also curious about the content that you're curating?
Uh, can we let Aashima quickly finish, maybe, before we take this question?
Yeah,
Just
thanks. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say about ghostwriting. Like sometimes, like there are, we can look at it in this way that there are two challenges ahead of us when we're starting out. First, to learn and really have our brand. We don't have to also think about it in such a capitalist way, but have a style, have a niche, etc. Really arrive at what work we want to do. And the other thing is, while you do these amazing things with your ambition, with your drive, with what you've learned, you also need to survive. And this is something I really like, I'm cautious of, because I don't want to send you all and say, hey, SciComm is great, do your thing, because it is hard. And in the end, you have to pay the rent, and you have to buy food and make your life work, like, somehow, if it is really your profession, it should also nourish you, right? And for this, I would say it is not so bad to take up some ghostwriting work. Sometimes it is not so important what is being written. There is a lot of also like things that need to be written down that don't need a specific voice behind it, right? Like in say a press release needs to be written, important work that an organization needs to do, or a scientist wants to write their biography, or wants to write a book, and you help them write it, or you write 80% of it or 40% of it. And for this especially, it has helped me, I have to confess, simply put some money in my bank account, so that I can continue to do like important things which don't always pay so good. So I mean, for especially for writers, ghostwriting is something that goes on, that puts food in your table and stuff. And not all ghostwriting is bad, but of course I agree completely with Abhishek that there is really a need for transparency in our community. As we form up our discipline, I think it's the best time to have these values already discussed and agree that we want to go ahead in a transparent space and be accountable for what we write, etc. But when you're beginning, especially, I think it is perfectly okay to take up the gig that you get, that you might not be credited for, but it also gives you practice to write, and also gives you a view into how the other side, other part of, like, not freelance work, but sorry, not like indie work, but also how institutional writing happens, etc. Yeah.
For Sarah's question, maybe I can jump in, and then others can add to it. And the question is about target audience and how do you keep a finger on their pulse. And I think I want to start by saying that we often talk about communicating to the general public, and I really want to make the point that there is no such thing. There is no universal audience. You cannot club a huge, like, everybody who's not a scientist into one category and lump them together for your communication. So it becomes very, very important to think about who you are talking to and why. If your aim is education, who are the people who would benefit from this science education, and how can you reach them best? If your aim is to maybe convey certain kinds of public information, who are the people, again, who need that information in their lives, and that's how. And I think someone in the panel mentioned the deficit model and growing out of it, and that's also somewhere where this becomes very important. A lot of our science communication has been in India, has been unidirectional, like we decide what the public needs to know and what the public needs to know, and we frame our communication in such a way. But what's good is that I think in recent years we are beginning to move beyond that, which is starting dialogues rather than just monologuing. That is asking people to step in with their thoughts on science and where we can fill such gaps. Again, I think others can maybe expand upon this theme, but it also depends on if you're a freelancer, for example, every publication that you are going to write for is going to have a sort of niche target audience that they're going for. So it's important to inform yourself about that before you pitch a story or before you start a project, that who am I writing for, or doing any form of science communication for. And similarly, if you're part of an organization like India Biosciences, target audience, for example, would be different from a newspaper's target audience, would be different from an institution's target audience. So yeah, I think respecting your audience, investing time in getting to know them and their needs is something that's very, very important, no matter what stage of your career you are in. So yeah, I think I'd like to stop here, and Ipsa wants to go next, I think.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with everything that Shreya said. I just want to add one tiny little thing, which is something that sort of I've done a lot in the work that I've done with Somdatta. Is it's kind of like layering your work in a way that allows different audiences to access it in different ways. They'll look at the same work, they'll identify some common points which will be uniform across audiences, but some audiences who are more informed may be able to make far more connections than an audience that is not necessarily initiated to the idea that you are trying to convey. So those possibilities are also there, where you can hide Easter eggs or leave some things that your audience, depending on their context, can build on. So you can start at like in the startup world, there is this minimum viable product, right? So something like that, something that will make sense to maybe a larger set of people, but something else that will make sense to fewer and fewer people based on their context and where they're coming from.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Itza and Shreya said with my experience with Research Matters. So, as Research Matters, like when we started out, we wanted to take science out to quote unquote general public. So, what we meant to say there was that, anybody who is reading a newspaper should be able to read and understand what was on Research Matters. So I think it's also important to know who are your current target audience, like who is consuming what you're doing, and who are going to be your eventual target audience, and how you make the journey and the leap there. Because when with Research Matters, because a lot of people who were running this came from an academic background, our initial readership mainly constituted of institutional scientists and people who are in that circle of academia, maybe research scholars, current PhD students, current master students, and with very specific institutions that we were connected to, because most of it spread from the word of mouth. But later on, until last year that I've seen, there was a bit of a reach that we expanded into some pie of the general public. So what I mean by there is that some people knew the website as their news source, that they could like pick it up to read during their weekends or something. So we used to publish one story every day. So there were some readers who would like read it, just scan it at the end of the week, or just engage with us on social media, so we knew who were there. So one of the things that really helped us gauge this journey is metrics. And uh, every year we would just define what our metrics would be, like whether this is what kind of engagement we want to be involved in. Some people do it through events, some people just do it through their social media engagement. There are various impressions and other metrics you get with different platforms on social media. So it's also important to keep a check on that to see where you are going, like what is the geography of the audience who are engaging with you, what is the demographics of the audience who are engaging with you, and things like that. But again, a caveat there, that's not the be all and end all of things. Numbers tell a story, but they don't tell the complete story. So it is you who is in a better position to kind of make that decision, to really understand what these numbers are actually adding to your story. So don't just go on the numbers, but then it's also important to figure out who your current audience are, because you don't want to lose all of them, but then you also want to aspire a wider reach, obviously, because you are communicating things. So just know the difference between the two, and then see how you want to map going from A to B. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am Ramita, currently an intern at SciRio. Do excuse Suchita for not being able to lead the discussion on, and thank you so much for all being so cooperative and leading the discussion on. For the audience, we regret the inconvenience, and the whole video will be available later to watch. And about the announcement, it will be announced tomorrow on our social media platforms. We hope with your examples, the beginners in SciComm will figure their way out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Ramita.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Romita and Jyotika. And thanks, everyone who came to look at us.
Thank you. Yeah, a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
luck. Keep in touch.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
I don't know how to log out.
Let's
Yeah,
just close
also
the
log
window.
out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about too.
That's
Bye,
literally
everyone.
what you have to do.
Bye.